So I'll just make two housekeeping announcements before we begin our discussion of the guiding principles. The first is that we've decided to hold a press conference tomorrow for the media where we can share the set of guiding principles if we are content with them. But we've already arranged to meet with them to express some of these ideas in the document tomorrow at noon. And the press conference would be held in the room where we had lunch today, so on the 9th floor, room 901. And all the panelists are requested to come along if they haven't made alternative plans so that we can have a group press conference session where we can share the guiding principles. The second matter of housekeeping is that we will end promptly because the room is to be used for another lecture this evening. So by about 6:10 at the very latest, we'll have to vacate and we're going to head to dinner. We've made arrangements to be bused to dinner downtown. So if we could just have everyone gather perhaps in the lift lobby as a group so we can all go down to the car park to grab the bus, that would be great. Okay, thanks. So that's all panelists.
Okay, we have this principles on the screen, but we should be able to give you your own printed copies in a few minutes. But we could start with that, or I want to apologize to many people in the back rows who probably didn't get a chance to make their statements, and people in the front rows dominated the discussion. So maybe if there are some thoughts that you want to share with us, or some comments you wish to make, while we are waiting for the printed copies, we could have some discussion. Yes.
Yes, I just wanted to make one point. I think it's probably reflected. I can't, of course, see all the principles. There are in many countries candidates for election, including for the head of government, are in fact nominated by nomination committees. We call them political parties. And the reason that that's acceptable is, number one, that everybody can join a political party, and if they can't join the ones that's there, they can form their own. That's not something we can aspire to in this particular context. But I think the other two factors are perhaps that the process of choosing the candidates from political parties is becoming, by practice in most countries, increasingly transparent. It used not to be, but I think it's something that is improving. And secondly, that there is participation that takes place in the form of public discussion and analysis of the candidates. And I think those are two factors, as I say, they were mentioned, both transparency and participation. But I think they're very, very important. Participation will not be possible if you don't have enough time for people to be thinking about who the possible candidates are and being able to air their views in a reasonably open way. So I hope that both those factors can be reflected.
Anyone else? I think they're getting the printed copies now. Oh, yes. Yes, Lo.
I'm a bit concerned about the first point in the preamble. It seems to suggest that these civil and political rights are more akin to economic, social, and cultural rights, to aggressive, progressively, and that seems to be some kind of tolerance of violation of rights than advocacy for improvement. I would not say we want to progressively reduce torture in Hong Kong. So I hope this kind of so-called progressive thing should be removed here. And bear in mind that your recommendations, if can be treated in favor, okay, by the Chinese authority, will be adopted, and they will say thank you for that. But very positive thing, okay, I think there's a very slim chance it would be really be adopted. But to the community, your recommendations or guidelines or principles would be helpful for us to struggle for universal and equal suffrage. So please, a little bit be more careful about the use of wording, so it would not be twist to delay our efforts to achieve full democracy. And I think it is more productive to try to set out something which should not be seen as the UN Human Rights Committee has set out in the concluding observations in the recent hearing. And it's also maybe useful to say that you prefer something rather you do not, as well as saying that something is not preferred, like say the 4 sectors. You do not prefer that because it is conducive to discrimination and other kinds of manipulation. So I would urge you to do things in that direction to help the movement more effectively. Thank you.
I just want to sort of add a caveat here. What we've tried to do is we've tried to take on board the comments that were generated from the floor earlier in the spirit of inclusion and just put them all out there for you. And really the time is now for us to think about and reflect on the language that we're using. And I think as Law has said, and Michael said so as well during the break, we need to think carefully about who is going to use this language in what way to achieve what ends. So we need to be really meticulous and critical. So please do air all of these concerns with every word so that we can refine this to be a text that we're happy circulating.
I just want to concur with Lawyer Kai on the first one. I would strike the first one because this idea, human rights, economic and social rights is a global debate on whether it's progressive and so on. And we don't really need to engage that because we're talking about the ICCPR. But in Hong Kong, the notion of gradual and orderly progress has been used more often to deny democratic and human rights development rather than to guarantee it. So I think the first one could be quite dangerous in terms of how it might be used. And then otherwise, I think I would concur with his other suggestion that somehow to indicate in the double way that Carol and I were talking about earlier that the selection committee isn't our favored position, it's just if it's used, you do that. But I don't know if it would be possible to state that explicitly that the goal is to have a committee that's broadly representative of the people in ways that satisfy universal suffrage and not just have our comment directed to the sectorial process, that maybe we should have a two-step in that maybe.
So on that point, we've tried to capture the discussion between, that we had about sectoral representation and the if that Carol talked about.
Which one are you, number, please?
Point 5 of the elements of the
below.
design. So maybe we can come to that.
If it includes so can we say something before the if it includes sectors? That ideally it should be directly representative of the people, something like that. And then if it includes sector, if that's not possible, and it includes sectors, so show a strong preference for a genuine election of nominating committee members rather than having that in the front. I don't know, it's just my thought. Maybe others have different views.
Perhaps dealing just with the first point first, are we in consensus that we're striking point number 1 in the preamble? If all panelists could just, yep, okay. Yeah. So should we take that as a,
Yes.
yep, okay.
Yes.
Dr. Fung?
Yes, I just want to say, express a view here on the point 1 of the preamble. I think as Yash mentioned at the very beginning in the morning, here we need to remember we have 2 paradigms here. One is the ICCPR paradigm, and the other is the basic law paradigm. Okay. So what are we going to bear both paradigms in mind when we write down the preamble as well as the principles? Or just we have one paradigm in mind? So if we have one paradigm in mind, then I think it's fine, you can get rid of it. But if you have two paradigms in mind, you have to comply with both the ICCPR and the Basic Law. And you can't just take one paradigm out of it, saying that forget about it, even though you have it there.
Well, I mean, I think I'm sure we all know which paradigm we want, but we also have been sort of discussing that this document has also to be read by the engaging, hopefully, and we don't want to alienate them too much by flagging our own paradigm. And this was put in, I suppose, recommendation was made because partly we wanted to indicate that we must move forward now also, and the new system must be an improvement on the one we had last time. But I can also see that this could be misinterpreted, and so suggestion has been made that we should take it out. What would be your preference?
My personal view is that maybe we can have a sort of, at the very first sentence or paragraph, as we refer, have a sort of broad reference to the ICCPR Article 25 and the Basic Law. Just a sort of broad reference to it. Because the nomination committee itself is coming from the Basic Law. We're taking one concept out of the Basic Law, then to measure it against the ICCPR, but don't mention anything else in the Basic Law.
I think at this stage it would be very helpful for us if we could get from all of you specific proposals of sentences or phrases that you want. That would help a great deal, so we can then discuss whether that captures exactly what you want to say. So if you want to have a broad sentence regarding Article 25 and incorporate the ideas currently in point 1, please suggest specific text, if you will. Thank you.
Sorry, I don't have a particular well-drafted sentence in my mind at the moment.
Well, I mean, you should have a bash at just off the cuff, because I think I know what you're saying, and I'm in agreement with it. That in developing the election procedures for the chief executive, there should be fidelity both to Article 25 of the ICCPR and the Basic Law.
Yeah, fine.
Yes, Professor Lee, you wanted to say something.
I have no objection to the deletion of preamble item number 1. I can see the force of the arguments, and because whatever has been said by Professor Lin Feng is actually reflected in the elements number 1, which are elements comprising both paradigms that you mentioned, right? So the substance is there in the element number 1. So if we expunge preamble number 1, I think the force of the preamble becomes have a greater persuasion, because it starts with a declaration that the legitimacy of a democratic government is derived from the will of the people of Hong Kong. I think by starting with that, I acknowledge that would have a greater cogency to it. So, and it would not do any harm to delete number 1, I think. On the point that has been made about the nomination committee, we might perhaps include after number 4, element number 4, something along the wording which had to be tightened up, the 4A, a nomination committee comprising elected representatives conforms to Article 25. Then we have number 5, however, if the nomination committee includes sectors, then we provide for that sort of exception. Martin, would you okay?
Harry, could I ask you to please repeat your point 4A that you recommended?
A nomination committee comprising elected representatives conforms to Article 25 of the ICCPR. Then number 5, however, if the nomination committee includes sectors, etc., etc.
There was a point that Michael wanted to make, and I also know some hands went up here, but so let's come back, but perhaps first take what Michael wanted.
Yeah, it's just a very short point. I wonder in 4 of the preamble whether the use of the word sectors is wise.
Can we go then by one?
Oh, you're going to go through them one by one?
I think that might be better.
Okay, good, because the word may
Yeah.
imply the sectors in the, yeah, okay.
Well, I like what HP is aiming at here, but I'm not sure everyone will understand what we mean if we simply say elected by the people, because in theory, even these sectors are elected by people. So I wonder if we need to be a little bit more specific that a nominating committee that consists of representatives directly elected by the people, such as members of the Legislative Council. I guess what I was trying to get at is that, at least to me, and this may not be everyone's view, but at least to me, a nominating committee has more legitimacy if it is made up of members of the Legislative Council or people who are elected in elections that are one person, one vote. I see the nominating committee model based on these sectors to be sort of a plan B, not quite as good. And that's why when I ranked my proposals, I liked the ones by Joseph Wong and Professor Chan a little better than the one by Albert Chen and Ronnie Tong. But I could see both of them complying with Article 25. I don't know if this group wants to take that ranking, but that's what I think HP is getting at, sort of that we feel very confident that a nominating committee that consists of legislators who are elected in a one-person, one-vote system are going to be representative of the people. We have a little less confidence that a nominating committee that's based on the 4 sectors is going to be broadly representative. But if that is the system, then we suggest ways to make it more representative. I think that's what Michael and I were talking about in the break. Whereas I think if we just say elected by the people, it's not quite clear what we're getting at.
You can have a nomination committee which comprises directly elected representatives, right? The directly elected representatives. Then that conforms to Article 25.
If you look at point 5 in the actual elements in the design of the process, I think we try to capture the idea you have. Maybe the wording could be made clearer.
In the second group.
The element. I think what he's calling 4A should be actually in 5. Should be the first sentence of 5. That direct election of the nominating, a nominating committee directly elected by the people is preferred. And then, if the nomination committee includes that.
Is kind of out of structure.
Right, and I'm wondering why we have the words "those appointed." Are they appointed? I mean, isn't the idea that they would be at least elected by their sectors?
Just a they,
Yeah, they should be elected in line.
Okay.
if the nomination committee includes representatives of particular sectors, then they should be elected in line with the principles of universal equal suffrage.
Okay. And the remainder,
Direct elections.
Do we need the language on co-opted members from other institutions? Do we need that?
It seems very circumlocutory. But what other institutions are there other than the future legislative council that are elected by universal equal suffrage?
Well, district council.
district council
Why not just say those two bodies?
could do. So instead of saying,
Deputies, yeah, that's another, the local deputies to the NPC might be another.
So we're going to put the sentence at the beginning of 5 that says, directly elected.
the sentence that you propose, the nomination committee comprising directly elected representatives is preferred. That comes first.
Okay, it's not up
Yes,
there,
yeah.
okay, I see.
Yeah.
And
Okay, good.
any such committee must conform with standards of Article 25 of the SCCPR. And then the next point would be the one that Carol was discussing now. However, if the nomination committee includes representatives of particular sectors, then they should be elected in line with the principles of universal and equal suffrage, or be co-opted members from other institutions. Now, is the consensus that we want to elaborate which institutions instead of this language are co-opted members? So we want to say district councilors, directly elected electoral members, and deputies to the
I
NPC.
guess you could have in parentheses as such as an illustrative list.
I think we should refer to that, the number of submissions that or something.
Co-opted leaves open the possibility of just people being cherry-picked. It's the idea that these
Yeah.
bodies are already democratic, you just want to
Yeah, the
give
word
them one
co-opt
on.
is a little odd. But you could perhaps say members of institutions, open parentheses, such as, I think we want to use language that doesn't try to tie the hands too tightly of anyone who's negotiating a compromise. And the such as language gets across our preferences, but we do realize that there's going to be some negotiations over the cost. Law has hand
Again, I'm a bit concerned about the use of term sectors because the election committee will exactly use this term sector in that. I think that they will just accept when they see that they will take this as if you are in a way and condone the use of sectors, and then they just perpetuate the current system. Perhaps we can rephrase it a little bit by saying that, well, unless we have this membership returned by universal suffrage, or else the membership should not consist of sectors, which would create, would contribute to problems of discriminatory, something like that, direct and indirect discrimination, something like that. Would that be helpful?
Well, I don't want to try to speak for the group, but this is my feeling about that. I don't like the idea of the way the election committee is made up now. And I would prefer just to have LegCo be the nominating committee. However, I'm not comfortable with setting down language that implies that we think that a nominating committee that had sectors could not possibly comply with Article 25, because I'm frankly trying to encourage people to negotiate and come to the middle. And so I would prefer not to issue a statement that gives people at either end ammunition to refuse to compromise. Because I think at the end of the day, that will be detrimental to Hong Kong. So while I don't mind indicating the preference, and that is my preference not to have these sectors, I also don't want to imply that I think we shouldn't try to negotiate on a nominating committee that represents sectors if it appears that that's the best best chance of reaching a compromise. So I totally fine with any language that shows a preference for directly elected people being on the nominating committee, but I'd rather not say that something that has sectors could not possibly comply with Article 25. I'd be a little uncomfortable with that. But I
might point out, say, there's the existing sectors or similar arrangement may be conducive to discrimination, something like that, and then should avoid that. Okay? Every effort should be done to avoid that kind of thing. I think at least we should mention that. That will give some kind of clear guideline on where this kind of sector should stop. Yeah, yeah.
As long as it doesn't say that it's non-negotiable, because I wouldn't want to give support to the idea that we're not going to negotiate in the middle, because there may be something that people can come up with that's creative, that preserves four sectors, but makes them much more representative. But I'd be happy to endorse something that says if sectors are continued, then we should take steps to make them much more representative of the voters.
Maybe you could say if the nominating committee is required to be made up of sectors, that would suggest no preference. You could stick a phrase in there that said, which raises problems of equality of voting. Every effort should be made to expand the sectors and achieve equality, something like that. So you could say if it's required to be made, in effect, we know who's going to require it. Maybe that would be said if it includes, if it's required to include, be based on sectoral elections.
Again, for avoiding use, if there should be things kind of wording like if it's required, and we should say, also say that the original text, okay, of the what the word was may, okay, may is not shall. I think we should point out this one to avoid being used by the Chinese authority. In that sense, I think
maybe we should say,
avoid being used.
Maybe we can say, well, we don't favor using sectors because of problems with equality of voting. If that is required, then blah, 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 the rest of the sentence.
Yeah. And then after that first off, anyway, it's not required. It will be said, if maybe.
Right, I agree with that. I agree with Paul that I don't want us to say anything that implies that we think the 2007 decision requires
okay.
sector. I agree with you, we shouldn't say that, because it only says may be based on. But so rather than using the words required, I think I would say if the legislative council, if 2/3 of the legislative council adopts
maybe if
a procedure that includes sectoral voting, then we believe it should be adjusted so that it is more representative of the people.
Probably say the government proposal.
Or the government proposal, yeah. If the proposal that is eventually arrived at maintains the four sectors, then the voting base should be expanded, and every effort should be made to distribute the voting power more equally among the people of Hong Kong.
So you start with a preface, while we don't favor the use of sectors to form the nominating committee due to problems with equality of voting, if that, then what you were saying.
Right.
Can we revisit point 6 based on the discussion, and then please point out where I might have messed up in incorporating everybody's views?
I hope this is a helpful comment, but to go back to the point of which was called 4B in those days, any such committee must conform with the standards of Article 25 of the ICCPR, impliedly recognizes that a nominating committee may comply with the ICCPR. And some people, I think, want to argue that it doesn't.
If you're talking about me, that's actually not what I'm trying to. I think a nomination committee could comply with Article 25. I just think a nominating committee that's made up of sectors as they're reflected in the 2012 election committee would not comply. And it's hard to imagine a nomination committee made up of representatives of those sectors, even in an expanded version, as compliant with the ICCPR. But I think a nomination committee in and of itself, without sectors, could comply with the ICCPR. I guess I'm trying to make myself less of an obstacle. If that's...
Surely it depends very much on how that committee is structured and so on. I mean, in principle, one could say that a nominating committee would be consistent, but only if it satisfies certain criteria.
Well, it's not a proposition that I have any difficulty with. I just thought other people might. I think it is clear that a committee that doesn't in fact obstruct the expression of the will of the people of Hong Kong will comply.
Would that be addressed by some of the core values we've tried to put in the preamble?
I'm not suggesting any change.
I also was of the view that this morning we all sort of had a consensus that we didn't feel that a nominating committee per se was violative of Article 25. Much would depend on how it's constituted and what powers it has. So are we at a point where we can go back and do it step by step, or do we want to refine point 6 further?
Can I just say, I'm the one person in the room who does think a nominating committee, that its role is to screen out people. By definition, the concern in this room, the elephant in this room, is that they'll screen out the most popular or most democratic candidate, and therefore its only point, in a sense, is that, and it will be a black box, it will be a political animal by necessity, so no one can be really, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, no one can be really sure until a particular committee is made up, but all you can do, and you're doing quite well, is to try and send out signals. You want the committee to be as accountable as possible and as open as possible.
And I think as we go, we need to keep thinking about what else we need to have in there as features or requirements of such a nominating committee, what procedures they adopt in making the decision. Exactly. So yeah, we need to keep all those boxes in our mind, make sure they're all checked as we go through the list. Okay, so shall we go back to the beginning? Okay. We're missing.
Instead of this entails tailoring a process, maybe requires a process that is inclusive, just to make it more direct.
So we've deleted the original point 1, which is on the handouts that you have, and we've now got point 2, which has become the first point.
Can I?
Good?
I have a concern about, yeah.
Sorry, Michael? I didn't...
Sorry, I think it was Professor Forsyth.
I hope I'm not being unhelpful, but I'm afraid I went back to question 1. I mean, point 1. The legitimacy of a democratic government in Hong Kong and elsewhere is derived from the will of the people, full stop. And this requires a process that allows expression of the will of the people, or allows expression of the genuine will of the people.
And this requires a process that allows?
That allows the expression of the will of the people, allows the expression of the genuine will of the people.
Yes, Carol?
Are we down to paragraph 3 yet? No? Okay.
We're
When we
on
do, I
one.
have a concern about paragraph 3.
Are there any further comments on point 1? Sorry? Okay, okay. So for now, let's move on. We can always come back if something occurs to somebody. Point 2.
Do we really want that to be point 2? Do we want to move it down a bit so it's not so prominent?
So it's not so prominent?
Well, because we get into the issue in point, what was it, point 6 anyway, right? I'm just not sure if we want to repeat or... I'm just thinking maybe we don't want to put it in such a prominent place.
Yeah.
Point 2, if a nomination committee, as a second point, because it's...
We might have to
Yeah, yeah. We haven't even really gotten into our position yet, and then we're already hedging.
Well, wait. What comes before a nomination committee, other than number 1? I mean, what else?
Oh, right, okay, sorry, yeah, no,
We're not talking about
I was thinking about sectors,
We're
you're
not
right.
talking about sectors yet.
If a nomination committee, you're right, sorry, I missed.
Okay. But if this gets us to 3, that's where I am concerned, because
Don't bail on it. Just change 3 to say, any nomination committee should be reflective of blah, 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 blah. Then
more
push
direct.
the if down.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, maybe it's the if that raised the red flag rather than,
Okay.
I mean, I think I was reading sectors into it, but it's more, yeah, it's more direct to say it that way.
But the other point that Yash has also just brought to our attention is that, you know, in light of how things are going, our preamble is not really very preamble-like in nature. So we may do away with separating them and sort of combine what we have in point 2 with what we're trying to say later on in point 6 anyway.
Yes, I would say we should do that, and then at the end, we can think of a nice preambular sentence or statement.
Sure. Okay.
I mean, my concern is paragraph 9 at the end is really so weak. I would suggest having something up front like this that the only sure way to comply with Article 25 or international law is to have a process of direct civil nomination. Even though we know you're not going to get it, why isn't that being stated up front as a guiding principle? Does anyone disagree that the only sure way
Oh, yeah, you
to
could,
comply?
you could put that up, sure, as the ideal.
I don't know if it's not the ideal form of governance, but I think it's the only sure way to comply with Article 25.
Any submissions on that?
I didn't mean moving that paragraph per se. I meant having a statement up front instead of the slightly hedging one that you were objecting
Well,
to.
I do like the phrasing of paragraph 9. I think it's nicely done. The phrasing of it should be considered in parallel to or to feed into. I like that.
It seems very weak, not just being at the end, but it could be something you consider. If the point of preamble is to state these are what we think are the basic principles of international law, and you don't want to be in compliance with international law, that's fine, but you have to accept that there's a trade-off.
How about saying something to the effect of, in order to be compliant with international human rights principles, no civil nomination secured, publicly or through particular mechanisms should be subject to exclusion or by the nominee?
The only clear or guaranteed way to be compliant with Article 25 is to have a process, doesn't have to be the only process, a process of direct civil nomination.
So maybe to use the word allow, to allow a process of civil nomination.
Allow, or to have a, or to include a. To make it clear it's not exclusive.
Right.
Inclusive. But if you like, I can write that down and
Or you
email
could
it to
dictate, and I could put that in as point 2 for now, and we can listen to Professor Forsyth then.
Well, I mean, are we just chasing after a rabbit here? Aren't we agreed that Article 45 of the Basic Law requires us to requires the process to proceed by way of a nomination committee, and therefore, classic civil nomination, desirable as it might be, compliant as it might be, is just not on the cards? If that's right, do we want to include something in the statement that really adds nothing to the message of the statement?
But it's not excluded from Article 45 of the Basic Law. There's nothing that says we can't have a civil nomination process, except that's what government officials are telling us now, that concept is contrary to Article 45 and the decision. But there's nothing in the text to suggest that we can't have a process running parallel to the nomination committee, or which could feed into the nomination committee's own nomination process.
That's right. I mean, it's certainly possible that the nominating committee could receive a petition of civil nomination. I tend to agree with you that it's perhaps unlikely, but I think there's nothing to prevent us, if we agree, and putting it as a preferred option.
Well, I think we're going back to the substance. I don't think there's anything wrong with people nominating possible or potential candidates to the nominating committee. But that's not what is meant by civil nomination. That's not what I understood you to mean by civil nomination. Civil nomination is the idea that individual citizens can nominate themselves in appropriate numbers. Yes. Now, when Article 45 of the Basic Law uses the words, the nominating committee shall be, the chief executive shall be nominated by a nominating committee, that seems to me to be prima facie to exclude the option of direct nomination, direct civil nomination. That is perhaps undesirable. In an ideal world, it wouldn't be there, but we're living in a different world. So if that's our starting point, do we want to put something into the statement about the desirability of about direct civil nomination? If the statement has, I would think, more thought on the points that it is right.
Well, because, the title of this document is Guiding Principles on Desirability in National Human Rights Standards, rather than on Article 45 trumps all. That's why I phrase it in terms of the only guaranteed way to comply with Article or the ICCPR is to allow a process of direct civil nomination.
Fair enough.
Unless it's inflammatory.
Fair enough. I take that point. But in our context, we can't have a look on it.
Of course, you go on in the next paragraph to say, Article 45 of the Basic Law, if conditionally we accept the realities of politics. And this is the second one. Isn't that what we're doing here?
I agree with Professor Forsyth that if we know that direct civil nominations are off the table, that's quite clear from the text of Article 45. What is less clear is whether any civil nominations that can be taken into consideration by the nominating committee are off the table as well. So I would prefer softer language, so that might creep in, as opposed to sort of them focusing on the word direct civil nominations and say, no, these are not principles we subscribe to.
That's diplomatic.
Yes, I mean, I'm a bit unclear as to the precise function of these principles. Are they to strengthen the hand of civil society, other groups who might at some stage get involved in negotiations, or in which case this would be perfectly proper to say, to provide for civil nominations. But if we see this as not as a negotiating document necessarily, but as persuasive of the government, then maybe we should have a provision under which proposals from other groups are channeled to, and the nominating committee considers them. That's all we could require. It's a bit unclear as to what really is the function of these principles. If they are to state what we think should be done, then we could keep this language. But if it is not to alienate the people of the government too much, then I think we probably follow Professor Forsyth. Are you suggesting that we might put in that these are channeled to, or these are, so the decision will be made by the committee and not by...
Well, I thought these proposals, whatever we come up with, would be going into the consultation process.
If I could just elaborate, the objective of this particular document is to educate the public and allow them to use these guiding principles to evaluate the proposals that are starting to emerge for the upcoming reform exercise. And I think that tallies with our own goals at the beginning of the day, where we said we're trying to harmonize the requirements under Article 25 and also Article 45 of the Basic Law, because they present us with contending goals going forward. So it's probably important for the document not to run too far past what we can do in the Hong Kong context, and to bear that in mind so that it can be used as an effective lobby tool. And ultimately, we would want to premise any submissions to the consultation process by drawing on these principles and highlighting which proposal might actually be a suitable way forward for Hong Kong. Does that answer?
You could just put something like this, that you say in 3, if nominations are determined to be required within such nominations should constitute a way as to genuinely representative of Hong Kong people, this might include civil nominations or processes of public consultation. So in effect, you say it's an approved and effective way, but you don't take as strong a stand on it as you do in the draft Article 2 at the moment.
Sorry, I want to go back to point 2. I'm a bit uncomfortable with the expressions, and the only guaranteed way to comply with Article 25 is to allow that. Maybe it's better to say it's desirable to have a direct civil nomination.
what I just said for 3.
So if the language in 2 is too strong, are we happy to go with what Michael's just suggested for the tail end of point 3? But I'm also concerned that we were earlier talking about moving point 3.
Actually, the current state of Article 2 ignores the other possibilities, actually. For example, there are other ways to propose candidates. So if you say it's the only guaranteed way, and first, it's not true. Second, civil nomination is already a controversy, we know. That will create much more than that, much more controversy of that. So I don't feel very comfortable with this phrasing, actually.
So would you be more comfortable with the softer language here?
Yeah, that should be better.
Okay. So are we looking to delete 2 for now? It's too strong?
It's not meant to be exclusive. It was meant to be a statement. I thought was completely obvious. The only guaranteed way for an individual right to have an opportunity to stand is to have some form of civil nomination. But I won't press it because I'm in the minority.
I mean, the consensus is probably to use softer language simply because of the objective of the exercise, which might be defeated if we have that in there. Right? Does point 2 stay where it is? Kelly?
I thought we suggested a way to make it more direct, or the language more direct, but now I don't remember. I think you made a good suggestion.
So I remember what that is. So, so no, 2 will not stay where it is, but let me just say first how it will change. So you'll change 3. Okay, so the beginning of 3 will say, any nomination committee, sorry, this is going to be clumsy, I'm doing it on the fly, but a nominating committee needs to be reflective of the will of the people or something like that. It's going to repeat, I apologize. Anyway, the point is, once you make the point here in point 3, which will be 2, about a nominating committee, and as to reflect Graham's, we want to put up front our principles, then we push that but down low to like 4. It's got to be below, right? Is that right, Kelly?
If it has to be exclusive, then it has to reflect the will of the That's the logical.
Because we're developing general procedures or general principles, so I think it's fine to use that.
Can I just put the word exclusive is? The nominating committee is exclusively to be used. So that is, if we had direct nomination, the nominating committee would not have to be.
Right.
So it could be just the worthy getting together and put forward worthy.
Yeah, maybe if the nominating committee is the exclusive mechanism, exclusively to be used is a lot to me, but is the exclusive mechanism, then it needs to be reflected.
Can I ask you a question on something that Carol just said? Reminded me of this. Is this supposed to be generally applicable principles outside of Hong Kong as well? Or we're just focusing on principles that apply in Hong Kong?
We started out wanting to do the former, but I think we have quite a lot on our plate with just dealing with the latter. So we probably say that these are specific to the Hong Kong context, and let's try and develop what we can take hold here.
Okay, I'm just wondering, as we go through the text and the language, if we might want to turn a line, like it could be adopted eventually to become a set of more general principles. So we might want to keep that in mind as we're going through and editing the text.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's late in the day, and I'm getting, and I travel 15 hours. I travel 15 hours, so just, we overruled ground previously, and now we're going the other way, okay? I thought that a nominating committee was required. So if it's required, why do we have if? A nominating committee needs to be. I don't mean to be, well, whatever, it's late in the day, so who cares? This is who I am. But I just don't get what we're doing here with two. Yeah. Okay? If we're staying within the context of what is required by the basic law of Hong Kong, then why are we saying if a nominating committee? It is required. Is that not true?
Can I have a bash at the wording of two and see whether it helps? Otherwise, then I'll shut up. Any nominating committee which may be constituted under Article 45 needs to be reflective of the will of the people, and as such, it needs to ensure equal representation of different sectors, etc.
Okay, I like the first part. When you get to the sectors, I want to talk. Yeah, I don't like the use of that word sector. So any nominating committee. Okay, the reason I don't like the use of sector is that it almost sounds like we are saying that we like the makeup of the current election commission. I thought we had agreed that isn't our first. So I think if we use the word sectors, if we say it needs to be equally representative of different sectors of society, some people are going to interpret that to mean the 4 sectors. So I would prefer not to use the word sectors in our preferred model. I think there are other ways to endorse the principle of equality without saying it must represent all sectors, because that could be taken as even endorsing the idea of all 4 sectors have to support a nominee. So I'd like to get sectors out of there, that language, if we could. I would just say it needs to ensure equal representation of the registered voters of Hong Kong or something like that.
Professor Lee, you were earlier shaking your head. Is there something? You're fine? Okay. How do we stand on 2?
In a new sentence right at the end, Hong Kong full stop, the inclusion and participation in the political process should be.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
The last part of paragraph 2.
Yes.
I think you need a new sentence. After Hong Kong in the
penultimate line, full stop, and then their inclusion and participation in the political process should be fully transparent.
Does there refer back to the nominating committee?
It refers to the voters.
The voters.
How can the voter participation be fully transparent? As with the nomination committees, selection and process is not transparent.
I can see that is actually a better reading than the one that I actually had. But to make it non-ambiguous, perhaps we should create a committee.
Could we make that last sentence a new principle paragraph that processes, selection and process procedures of the nomination committee need to be transparent? Or the selection of procedures used by.
We liked the language of inclusion and participation with respect to voters. Is there a way to keep this?
The voters' inclusion.
Should we say to guarantee their inclusion and participation?
The voters' inclusion.
We've used will of the people 3 times in 2 paragraphs. Could we use at the top of paragraph 2, at the end of the first sentence, needs to be inclusive and participatory?
Needs to be inclusive and participatory here? Okay. Okay. So are we happy with 2? Still working on it. Paul?
Me? Put it right, it's fine. I don't know what it means to be participatory, but that's just fine.
Yeah, I don't know what it means to be inclusive. I mean, here's the thing, if I just keep trying to think of how this might be used. If somebody comes up with a viable proposal that the nominating committee be the elected representatives of the people in the legislative council, somebody might say, well, that's a very exclusive group. It's not an inclusive group. So I'm not sure we want to say that the committee has to be inclusive. You're talking about the process of choosing the nominating committee. But the committee itself might be a very exclusive body. It might just be 60 or 70 people if it's the directly elected representatives of Hong Kong. So
what about moving that up to 3? So the selection needs to be inclusive.
Maybe the electoral process for the committee needs to ensure.
Selection of the nomination committee.
Electoral process.
Yeah, we want to say electoral process instead of selection.
So the election process, huh?
Yeah. How about that? Spelling.
Yeah.
I don't think the procedures used are the procedures just as the nominating.
Can we take out procedure?
Process.
Well, process is called a procedure.
Well, one is the election process pertaining to the members of the committee. The other would be the procedures they use to nominate candidates. Those are the 2.
Right.
I see.
yes, that's what you want to be inclusive and participatory. You don't necessarily want the whole committee to be inclusive.
So does that better capture what we're trying to say?
Procedures of the committee need to be transparent. The process of forming the committee needs to be inclusive or representative.
I could alert you that we have to vacate this room shortly after 6, so we have half an hour.
Yeah, and 2 doesn't make sense anymore. It's like an incomplete sentence. So we have to go back and recombine that. Something like any nominating committee which may be constituted under Article 45 of the Hong Kong Basic Law should reflect the will of the people ensure equal representation of voters in Hong Kong. Maybe ensure should be changed to promote or reflect or something like that.
Yes, reflect is not better than ensure.
All right, so any nominating committee which may constitute a should reflect local people, representation of voters from Hong Kong, right? I like that.
That deals with the composition, and doesn't paragraph 3 just have to say the procedures used by the committee need to be transparent? So I'm not sure what participatory procedures.
So number 3, I would suggest just the election process for the nomination committee needs to be inclusive, participatory, and transparent, and take out procedures, because I don't think procedures need to be that later.
And then where do we deal with procedures?
I think number 4 is nomination process, so something that needs to be inclusive, participatory, and transparent. So the need needs to be changed to needs, because it's the election process for the nomination committee needs to be inclusive, participatory, and transparent.
So should it be for members of the nomination committee?
For the members, okay.
For electing members of the nomination.
The process for electing members of the nomination committee of the process for electing members of the nomination committee, I would say should be rather than needs to, which is should be.
And then we have the procedures.
Okay, yeah, so then that can start out with the nomination procedures used by the nomination committee or the nomination procedures. Be transparent and should not be used to prevent the nomination
of a candidate who complies with Article 44 of the Basic Law and enjoys public support. That's the first try.
Article 44 of the Basic Law
and enjoys broad public support.
What does that mean, broad public support? How do you think that would be measured?
300,000 signatures, no, I'm joking. I don't know, it's a general principle.
I think that's useful because what that does is allows for the backdoor the possibility that civil nominations made which show that there's broad-based support cannot just be ignored by the nominating committee. So that
I think in the election, we should think of to preserve minorities as well. So in Japan, for many years, the liberal Democrats has dominated all the time, and the Democratic Party have never got a chance to govern, but yet it still had a chance to participate. And from time to time, a small party may emerge to be a major party. They have to participate in the debate and in shaping public policy, platforms of other parties as well. So maybe we should not just restrict those candidates to be those who really command a really large section of support. At least some kind of certain degree of support, public support, I mean, it should be adequate and more in line with the national standard. And on point two, a minor point, we have to distinguish geographical constituency voters from functional constituency voters. It is to be interpreted as a functional constituency. Then number two, we will have serious problem. Should we qualify a bit, say, voters in geographical elections, something like that? Thank you.
I mean, we have to say human voters, not corporate voters. Is that well, you could change voters of Hong Kong to the people of Hong Kong, if you want to ensure that. So, to the people of Hong Kong.
What about the second point pertaining to setting the bar too high?
I don't mind deleting broad. I'm happy with that.
I think that was the basis of my question, is that this could be misinterpreted or construed the other way. And people might say, oh, well, that means that someone has to enjoy broad public support in order to be nominated.
Right.
And that could imply a higher bar.
Right. So,
even though that's not what you mean, or that's not
I know. So, well, I guess what I'm asking is, would you amend enjoys public support? Would you get rid of that?
I think public, maybe without the broad, it's okay. Is law okay with that?
Maybe we can say that it should also accommodate, be able to accommodate or to ensure some kind of minority committee participation as well. Candidate commanding.
But would all of that be satisfied if we just said that as long as the candidate fulfills the requirements of Article 44, then they should technically be considered for nomination?
Yeah, I think that's tricky though, because that does kind of go back to the idea that everybody can be nominated. I mean, not everybody, but so many people would satisfy Article 44. I guess what I was trying to get across was that the nomination procedures shouldn't be twisted in such a way that an otherwise viable candidate doesn't even get on the ballot. So I'm trying to think of a way to say that without
Just wondering whether we are getting a bit too convoluted in drafting number 4, and whether really it should just be simplified to express the sentiment that the nomination procedures used and at the given sentence, the nomination procedures used and the eligibility criteria adopted by the nomination committee should be transparent, full stop.
Well, in Puja, I mean, the language I suggested in my number 3 was originally the nominating procedures should be transparent and the threshold for nomination should be reasonably low to ensure that the public has a meaningful choice of candidates. In particular, the procedure should not create mechanisms whereby certain sectors, in quotes, of the nominating committee can exclude a qualified candidate who enjoys broad public support. So I'm not saying we have to use all that language, but that's the idea to work in the concept that one particular sector of the nominating committee should be able to veto or keep out a candidate. And I'm getting tired. I'm not making any sense anymore.
Should we draw on the language submitted in Carol's paper?
Although it didn't have that broad public support, so maybe that's not good.
Well, what if we work for now with what Professor Lee's just recommended?
Yeah, that would be.
So this nomination procedures used and the eligibility criteria adopted by the nomination committee should be transparent.
You see, the problem I have with the sentence, the first sentence in number 4, which says should not be used to prevent the nomination of a candidate who fulfills the requirement of Article 44 of the Basic Law. The Article 44 talks about Chinese citizenship not less than 40 years and permanent residence. But what if the person had a criminal conviction? You wouldn't want that person to be the chief executive of Hong Kong. So that sentence then prevents, prohibiting such a person from being appointed. So by arguing for transparency of eligibility criteria, then the people of Hong Kong can recognize whether this person is suitable to be the chief executive of Hong Kong.
But on your proposal, does it leave it too broad, that as new criteria can be introduced as they have been, in a soft manner, that the person should love Beijing or Hong Kong or should be non-confrontational? So in a sense, Article 44 gives us at least some parameters to work with. Whereas if we...
But at the same time, on the drafting of that, a person can be a criminal, enjoys public support of Hong Kong, and yet you can then say he can assert a right.
I'm hesitant to use language like unreasonable restrictions, because again, it's a question of what that might be, but that language doesn't appear in the general comment and in the ICCPR itself. Do you want to put on that language? Then you could have Article 44 and unreasonably restrict the nomination of a candidate.
This is what we want to say, what Professor Lee just used. Is that enough? Nomination procedures used in the eligibility criteria adopted by the nomination should be transparent.
Does that leave it open too much for the nomination committee to come up with these types of criteria that are possibly problematic, like loving the country and that sort of thing?
They've thrown in about 2 or 3 new criteria over the last year, which do not appear in any documentation.
It's sort of opening the door for possibilities that we may not agree with.
I thought the whole purpose wasn't of suggesting low thresholds if you're on the committee, is that this process isn't going to be bound by eligibility criteria adopted by the whole nominating committee. If that happens, then you're just going to have a sort of trap that you would just envisage.
How do we get out of the trap?
Should be fair and transparent.
Yeah. You can use the inclusive way.
So the moment you use criteria like so-called love Hong Kong, okay, the argument would be this is not a fair criteria or unreasonable.
Do we need eligibility criteria at all?
Should be reasonable, fair, and transparent to cover all bases.
I guess that would boil down to what's the requirement of something that is transparent. Does it mean it needs to be enacted through the law, be certain, discernible, publicized?
We need to know, in other words, if the nomination committee adopts criteria, you have to tell us what those criteria are. You cannot hide it.
So if they're telling us we want a candidate who loves Hong Kong and loves China,
Then you have to argue, is this a reasonable and fair requirement?
is it unreasonable to expect that the CE should love Hong Kong, love China, since he's got these fabricated loyalties?
Everybody in Hong Kong loves Hong Kong.
I think we are talking in general principles. We are not using very somebody got conviction, somebody was drunk. We are just establishing the broad principles.
In that vein, then, shall we stick with Professor Lee's suggestion for point 4? Nomination procedures used in the eligibility criteria adopted by the nomination committee should be reasonable, fair, and transparent.
Could you scroll down a little bit so you can see 5? And I ask that only because we're losing something in the conversation we had before when Carol mentioned this, which was, so the concern here was that one sector be able to be no candidates, right? That was the concern that was raised. And I thought there was broad agreement that,
I said, did everyone agree on that? And it seems like they don't anymore, but they did a few hours ago. So I like Professor Lee's wording of 4 because it makes it parallel with 3. I like that. So the selection to the committee on 3 should be inclusive, participatory, and transparent. The procedures used by the committee should be reasonable, fair, and transparent. I like that. I like the parallelism of the two. I think that we could potentially handle the criteria by which individuals can make it through the nomination process in 5. So I guess I'm sort of endorsing that language, but I do not want to lose the sense that we don't want small sectors, moneyed sectors in particular, to be able to veto candidates that are not representative of the will of the people. So yes, delete it like you're doing. Carol.
Sorry to go back to the eligibility criteria, but would it be possible to delete that? I mean, maybe in some ways that's implied by the nomination procedures anyway, but I'm just still concerned about including reference to eligibility criteria. Are we stuck on that? Yes. Nomination procedures used by the nomination committee or adopted by the nomination committee should be reasonable, fair, and transparent. Because do we want to encourage them to adopt eligibility criteria?
Say any. They're going to do it.
But do we need to include it in our document?
I'm just thinking about the use of the 2 criteria that have popped up over the last year to exclude potentially members of the panel count or even securing the requisite number of votes for nomination. And I'm thinking eligibility criteria are important. It's not just about the procedures.
That's why I still stick to my original position that the nomination procedures should not be used to add new eligibility requirements beyond what's in Article 44. So I am uncomfortable with the phrase, and the eligibility criteria adopted should be reasonable, fair, and transparent. I mean, to the point about a criminal, someone with a criminal conviction, I mean, of course, every member of the nomination committee can take that into account, just the way they take into account who do I think is a better candidate. But I don't think that they should be creating firm legal restrictions on who can run that weren't put into Article 44 of the basic law. So, to me, if there's eligibility criteria, it belongs in Article 44.
So are you saying you're happy with 4, but you want to work in Article 44?
No, I would just take out what you have highlighted there. The nomination procedures used by the nomination committee should be reasonable, fair, and transparent.
That was what I was trying to suggest.
Is everyone happy with that as it is? With 4? Okay, let's move on to point 5. We have 20 minutes.
So, just to go back to the point, I think here is where we can put in, we can enshrine Carol's point if she wants to do so. Because when we talk about unreasonable restrictions here, and let me just make sure I know where I am. Yes, so we say unreasonable restrictions on people's right to participate and it's awkward, but participate in, stand for election, and would it be possible to put in there, or be nominated by the committee, right? So isn't this the point at which we could link the ability to be nominated with the principles of equality, non-discrimination, inclusion, and participation? So then, when a proposal is made, for example, that says you need to be endorsed by the head of Citibank, Carol can say, well, you know what, I don't think that's, of course, not object to that, but if you would, I think this is the place to put it.
And you mentioned this was awkward, so do we leave vote in there, or you just want to participate in or stand for election or be nominated.
Participating implies participating in public affairs. Don't we just regurgitate the language of Article 25A there?
Could I just make one picky grammatical thing? It's not plural possessive peoples because, I mean, people, it possibly should come before the S because we're not talking about group rights here, it's individual rights. Okay.
Yeah, CYO sent an email. That's one of his dozen comments. Mr. Lowe has sent an email to all of us.
Oh, I see.
He's got something to say in our censorship. Yes, he was concerned that could be read as a group right.
Okay, thank you.
So I think the point, and I don't mean to speak for others, but I think the point was that it should be people's right to stand for election, be nominated, people's right to stand for election or be nominated. I think that's all that matters here, right? This is not about voting.
No, but the reason we left it participated was to, again, allow for back to a civil nomination. So even though people may have non-nominating committee and ultimately not be able to choose the candidates they want to choose from, but maybe they're part of the civil nomination process.
Okay, so then let me try again here. People's right to stand for election, comma, be nominated, comma, or participate in the selection process, comma. And then I think the rest will stay, particularly bearing in mind, et cetera.
It's a long sentence. Any suggestions on how to break it down would be welcome.
Well,
so you want me?
do you need the to render any nomination, blah, 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 that whole clause? Because this whole conference is about the ICCPR. You could just start with there ought to be no.
Maybe we can sit on it and think about it.
Yeah, I don't mind, but if you're really looking to shorten it,
yeah.
or you could just say in compliance with international human rights law, comma, there ought to be. It's a bit of a mouthful right now.
The reason for including international standards of human rights law was to bring in what Kelly and some of us have been talking about in terms of CEDAW, CERT, and...
Oh, I see, not just, right.
Okay. Are we happy with 5 for now?
Yeah.
Standards of human rights law.
Okay.
I think we've already said 6 now, haven't we?
6 is redundant.
Yeah, we can get rid of 6 now.
To take that, PY objected to the mention of the basic law 45
Okay.
in the guiding principles, which are meant to be, as I was saying, about the ICCPR.
But I thought earlier we said one of the ways of gender representation might include the civil nomination process. So we don't want that anymore?
Don't we have decided that?
Excuse me?
I thought we had decided that.
To leave it in?
And to leave it out. To take
Leave it out.
I might just be phased because it's so late in the day, but I thought that we wanted a way in which to, I mean,
indirect civil nomination. You want to say the committee should be taking civil nomination. That's the idea of openness of the committee.
because Graham suggested direct civil nominations, and we said that's too strong a language, and then we came up with a softer language.
Okay, so I got another proposal here.
Yes.
Can I try again? Yes. So I really like Amendment 5. I know that 5 is an awful. No, don't kill it yet. Look, I really like Amendment 5. I agree with President, but this is the important turning point, right? I mean, this is the turn. This is where the rubber hits the road, I think. Here, in the end. I think this is it, or really. So if you take that last sentence, can't you skip the last sentence on to the end of 4, I think?
This one.
Right? Because we're stating what a principle about nomination procedures, and then we're suggesting it might be.
That's a good suggestion. Good
suggestion. Right? So then we kill 6. And we end where we want to, right? With the important statement here.
Yeah, I like that.
Perfect. Can you clarify what is processes of public consultation? So, these civil nominations or processes of public consultation, what do you mean by that?
So the idea was that if people can't be nominated simply on the basis of gathering the right number of signatures, they could still, the nominating committee could still consult with the public and see who might be popular and consider putting forward such a candidate. So it's not civil nomination as such, but at least they're consultations to ascertain the will of the people.
This should include civil nominations to the committee or processes of public consultation. Civil nominations to the committee, isn't that as a confusion over whether civil nominations are direct or indirect via the committee?
I think it's
And nomination procedure, use by nomination. That kind of implies that.
So are we explicitly saying it? Or are we leaving it deliberately?
You can say through the nominating committee, not to it.
But civil nominations wouldn't be, right, I mean, if we have to have a nomination committee, then they would inevitably be.
That's passed through either rubber stamp or deliberation. You don't have to answer that.
Is that implied by the first sentence already? Nomination procedures used by a nomination committee, and this should include civil nominations. Do you think it's worth repeating, or it's worth specifying?
I would think so. If we want to get that in there, then I think this is the only place to put it in.
We leave them out of public consultations, so essentially saying talk to people.
Right, I can't remember who said it today, but someone made a comment about the nomination committee having some potential candidates and then might hold public forums and whatnot for. Was that Albert? I think it was Albert.
And Eric.
And Eric.
Proposals with that in it.
Right.
That two-stage kind of
Yes.
nomination process.
And
I'm
I
not
think-
sure if we want that because it's complicated, but that's another thing about too many levels. But I don't think we need it here. It's a detail that can be left to.
But that's what I thought you meant by public consultation, something along those
Well,
lines.
public consultations could just be people collecting signatures and showing.
It could be many things.
Yeah. You just don't want to close off from the public. You want them to come and know the candidates.
Okay, so we're happy with 4 and 5? For now?
This should be these, it should be these rather than this, because it's nomination procedures is plural.
Thanks. All right, should we move further down?
On the last slide, 1.5, do you want to add term be elected or be nominated to reflect what was said in the first part?
Sorry, be nominated at the end, the last line.
That way?
Although you're nominated before you stand for election.
It's too complicated. You just, no, we did this already. We did it above. It's too complicated.
We've done all of these in the previous clause, the first sentence. This should just end hard and strong.
These are essential for the meaningful exercise of the right to participate in the political process. That's all we need there. Because the steps are above, stand for election, be nominated, participate in the selection process.
Yes.
Is that fine, Law?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, elements for the design.
Can I start with just a general question?
I'm not quite sure I understand the difference between guiding principles and elements of the design.
So what happened was when Professor Lee suggested we have a preamble with core values, we liked that idea, so we started out putting those down. And then there were several suggestions that came up in terms of the actual design. So we separated the two. But now it seems like we've actually gone into a little bit of the design, and what we call the preamble is not really a preamble at all. So we could actually...
we don't need it to be part.
We don't need to, no,
It's just guiding principles.
So I would suggest we just look at our list of the design stuff and see if there's anything that we really want to include in the main list, and if not, just delete it. Some of it is very repetitive now.
P.Y. Lowe said if you're going to have paragraph 1 there, he wants Article 26 of the Basic Law mentioned somewhere, which does refer to a right to stand for election in accordance with the law.
So can we just delete 1 and 2?
Yeah, in a sense, I think we've gone past this.
Yeah, I think we can.
Yeah. Just to satisfy Mr. Lowe, could we put Article 26 of the Basic Law, refer to that back, or refer to Article 45?
Here?
Yeah.
Article 26.
Permanent residents shall have the right to vote and the right to stand for election in accordance with law.
And comply with it.
So where would I put it?
You can say and comply with it, the article protection is at 26.
In P2?
Here, paragraph 2, yeah. Was that what, I think that's what you suggested.
But we're talking about the nomination committee here. Not about election, the right to stand.
Oh, okay.
Should we run down the list first and then come back to see where we might fit in Article 26 of the basic law? So can we delete the first 2 of these because we have already covered
Yes.
these 2 points? Is everybody in agreement? Is there anybody who objects?
3, 2, get rid of 3 also.
Yeah, we've done 3 as well.
Okay, we've done 3.
Yeah,
Now-
the new one is garbage too. We did that. We do corporate voting?
Well, Carol,
I'm the one who suggested getting rid of corporate voting, but I have to say I was somewhat moved by, I think it was Eric's comments saying, who knows, maybe we even negotiate that. I don't know, so I don't know if we want to.
I think we got to get rid of corporate voting. So
I feel we do, but.
So we need to put it here.
But whether it's a general principle, I don't know. It's a feature of all the proposals that I like so far, but I don't know.
If you can just stick it on the end of 4, I guess.
Or you could stick it on the end of the one that refers to equal representation, which is number 2. I mean, you could say, ideally, corporate voting would not be a part of the nomination system. You could.
Maybe more than ideally, we just should not be.
Corporate voting or any potentially discriminatory process?
So corporate voting should not be a part of the nomination process, full stop, no ideas here. And that I think it's good.
See, my only concern is after hearing Eric, it makes me wonder whether. I know I think it makes a good point, is that we're not going to be the ones sitting around the table negotiating, and I wouldn't want our principles to be used as a monkey wrench for us.
A lot of the voting argument, right? Is there anybody still opposing that? I haven't heard. Those people are even on the establishment camp agreeing to eliminate corporate voting.
I think
my understanding is that at least some sectors, they are prepared to not to retain their corporate voting, but not necessarily all sectors. There may be some business sectors. They think that we can't have any replacement as such, in the sense that that.
We got that.
Well, I mean, you could change it to corporate voting should be avoided because it violates the principle of equal suffrage.
Yeah, it should be avoided. I think that may be the better term in the sense that because that's under principles. So in the principles, we stated that principles that voting should be avoided.
And then it violates the principle of universal equal suffrage.
Because it does. Is that okay?
So you want to say corporate voting should be avoided?
Because it violates, so just change what's in.
Law, are you happy with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Professor Chu?
In principle, I agree with this clause. I don't think it's the right place.
Okay. Where would you propose?
I think put the lower part, where we're talking about some principle of design, right?
Okay.
This is about general principle.
But that's what we were just saying, that initially we started out separating the two because we thought we had
I prefer to, personally, I prefer two more.
You prefer two parts. Shall we for now go through the remainder of what was originally part two and see if we're actually going to have a part two? Then we'll move it back.
I think the next one is also in the above part, right? The new number one there. We already did that, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just received a note from the dean, we do need to vacate. So I think in 2 minutes, we really have to at least be happy with what we have so far. And then maybe we'll sort of carry the conversation on at dinner, but for now, if we could just work through the last few on the list.
So one can go out, right? It's already covered.
I think just about everything in the second list is already covered. So it could be that individuals here may want to add those things to things they write, but for general principles that we all agree on, I think we've pretty much covered it in the mold.
I think most of those are already covered.
Well, what about the inclusion of already directly elected members of other political bodies?
I think that is getting into more specifics, and I would suggest that if we're adopting a set of general principles, we leave that out for now. Anyone who's a member of this panel, or even groups of people on this panel, could always write something that has more specifics if we want to do so at some later date. But I think if we just want general principles that everyone here can get behind, I think you've got them in that first list.
So we have 5 principles.
I think you missed the suggestion, which is, am I wrong, that the line you moved on 2 should be on 4, isn't that correct? It refers to the voting procedure. The corporate voting is the voting procedure within the nominating committee, isn't it?
Yeah, so I think we're
Now, corporate voting is voting for the nominee.
Is that right? Okay, I apologize.
Yeah, corporations elect members of the nominating committee.
Right.
Okay, sorry.
So are we okay? Is that where it's supposed to be? Okay. Yes.
I think it's important to stress the will of the people. So again, should we say that the whole nomination process should ensure that people with real choice, genuine electors, when at the end of the day, those candidates were really adopted by the, or approved by the committee, or so the candidates in the final election
should really constitute that will make the election a new, genuine elections that people really have the free choice, sort of like that. Because quite a lot of our concern here is on the procedural side, right? Just like legal opportunities. To some extent, we want to that the results to be indicated here as a measure of how whether the system really could be live on international standards. The expression of will really like a government based on the will of the people. So do we need to add something here, at least to measure it?
Can we let the panelists sit on that over dinner and add to it? Because, yeah, we really have to.
Perhaps as to round it up, I simply saying, in accordance with what has been suggested, the adoption of the above principles will ensure that the people of Hong Kong will be able to enjoy a true and genuine choice in election.
I like it.
Yeah. Right, and don't have 6. It's just, it's like a closing. Maybe see, go down 1 space.
Adoption of the aforementioned principles would ensure that the people in Hong Kong I believe the word that would ensure that people
Is that fine?
Yeah.
Thank you. Let's head down, let's gather outside of the lobby and then we'll go down together. But we really need to wrap up and move ourselves out. But thank you all for your patience and for, collaborating to bring this together.